Welcome to JonGetsGames. Today, I'll be reviewing Cacao. In this game, you'll be playing personal tiles to a board, which let you execute actions on your turn as well as your opponent's turns. You'll be harvesting cacao beans, going to markets, controlling temples, and carrying a lot of water for some reason. First, I'll go over the rules, and then I'll jump into my review. Here is the starting setup for Cacao. This is a tile laying game, but there are two different types of tiles in the game. We have communal forest tiles, which are right here, and then each player has their own stack of tiles that are in their own color. They have 3 of these tiles in a hand that is facing only themselves. I have them face up here so you can see what's going on. You always begin with these 2 tiles in the middle of the table in this specific orientation, and then you just start the game going to the first player. Turns are very simple in this game. All a player does is select one of the tiles that is in their hand, and they put it out onto the board. Now, the only restriction is that when you put a tile out, it must be adjacent only to forest tiles, so this is a legal play. If there had already been a tile like this, which is the purple player's piece, you would never be allowed to place your tile directly adjacent to it. So let's say they put it down here. After placing your tile, you need to check to see if the forest grows. Now the forest only grows if there's ever an empty spot on the board that would be adjacent to 2 different player tiles. In this case, we have that spot, it's right here. So it's the player whose turn it is to pick one of the 2 face-up forest tiles and put it into that spot. In this instance, the red player may decide to take this tile right here and they slide it in right there. And once all of these situations have been satisfied, sometimes you'll be placing multiple forest tiles, you then evaluate the tiles. As you can see, the starting 2 tiles I put down here have a single worker in each of the 4 sides, but that's not always the case. If we look over here, we see that this one has single workers here and a double worker, but none on this side, and this one has 3 workers and 1, but 2 blank sides. So there will always be 4 workers on each tile, but the way they're spread out differs. Each worker activates once they are adjacent to a forest tile, so all 3 of these workers will evaluate for red, which means they will get 1 cacao bean here, 2 cacao beans here, and then this market right here lets you sell a single cacao bean for $2 for each of the actions performed. So those are the 3 actions available to the red player, and they get to evaluate them in any order they choose. So red would get 1, 2, 3 cacao beans, which they take from the supply, and then you put them on your little player board here, and you see on the bottom there are slots for 5 different beans, so you're never allowed to have more than 5 beans on you at one point. And then this worker right here will go to the market and sell one of these beans back and get $2 for it. So you put that back in your player area, and money is never used for anything, it's just victory points. Lastly, you check to see if any opponent's workers get access to newly built forest tiles. In this case, purple does. They have this worker right here, which is going to harvest 2 cacao beans. So purple is pretty happy about that. They get those even though it's not purple's turn. Now that red's turn is over, they flip over their own tile and bring a new tile into their hidden hand, and then they refill the forest tile stack to 2, and they move clockwise to the next player's turn. I fast forwarded a couple turns, and I'm now going to explain all the other types of tiles that can show up in the stack, but don't worry, there's not that many. So now let's say that the red player takes this tile right here, and they place it right there in the overall area. We see there are now 2 different gaps where the forest is going to have to grow, which means both of these face-up tiles from the offer are going to get placed onto the board. So let's say that the red player took the watering hole and put it right down here, and took this mine and put it right here. They now get to evaluate several of their actions. We have 2 different workers that are adjacent to this mine, and mines are very simple. You just take money from the bank equal to whatever's inside the mine equal to the number of workers. So 2 workers times 2, or 4 money from the bank. Next up is the water hole, and if you look at your player board, you see that there's this river that flows all the way around. So for every worker that is adjacent to a water hole, you move your little worker up once on the board, and you see you actually start with negative 10 points. This brings you to negative 4, so that was actually a 6-point move. We would now reveal the next 2 tiles from the offer. Red would get a new tile in their hand. And these are the last 2 tile types in the game. Now, there are mines that are different values, and there are different market values as well, but those are pretty self-explanatory. Now let's say that purple places their tile right here, and they look up here and they take this temple and they put it right down on the board there. They would go up once on their water track, but now we have this temple here, and we see a 6 and a 3. And temples are endgame scoring for majority. These 2 workers adjacent to this temple say that purple has 2 power when influencing this temple. When the game is completely over, we will go over every single temple, and we will see how many different workers are adjacent to each. The first place player is going to get 6 points, and the second place player for each of these temples is going to get 3. The tile offer would refill, and now let's just say that red has spent all their cacao beans and turned them into money at this point, and it is now their turn. They could go ahead and take this tile here, and if they were to place it here on the board, they would then need to fill 2 more slots, and they'd have a decision to make. If they put a tile right here, they would not actually get access to it, but they would be giving purple some access. But let's say they take this 3 market here. Now they might do this because they have no beans to actually sell right now, so this 3 is not good for them. And purple might also not have any cacao beans, so that would be a good way to burn the use of this one worker. They would not get access to any value from it. And then red would also take this tile right here and put it down here, and this is the sun worshipping site. For each worker adjacent to the sun worshipping site, the player will get 1 sun token. So in this case, red would get 2 and you put it on your board, and purple would go ahead and get 1. As you can see, there are only spaces on the board for 3 of these, so any further sun tokens beyond 3 would be wasted. Now that I've talked about each of the different tile types in the game, let's discuss the end game. There will come a point where every single one of these forest tiles has been placed out onto the board and there are none left in the offer. However, it's likely that players will have a couple turns left to go. And only now that all the forest tiles are gone do we get to activate our sun tokens. The way this works is on your turn you can choose to spend one of these. It's not forced, it's a choice, while placing one of your different tiles down onto the board in order to overbuild one of the spots you've already placed on the board. You're not allowed to place on top of anybody else's tiles, but this lets you get extra value out of a placement you might have done before. For instance, I could put this tile down right here. And now evaluate the new tile. In this case, you would get 3 different waterhole actions, so this would move up 1, 2, 3 times for another 6-point swing if we look at the board. And then we have one worker vying for this temple, putting them in second place and potentially getting 3 more points. Once every player has played every single tile in their stack, the game ends. The first thing we do once the game is over is to get points for all the temples out on the board. This is obviously not representative of an endgame board, but we see that there is a single temple here. Purple is winning it with 2 versus 1, so purple would get 6 money from the bank, and since red is in second place, they would get 3 money. Each player then looks at their water track, and they either gain or lose money depending on how far they got, so red would get 2 points in this instance. And lastly, each sun token not used gets cash back to the bank for a single money. Now we see which player has the most money, and they are the winner. Cacao beans are used only as a tiebreaker. For my review of Cacao, I'm going to explain my thoughts on each item of this list, starting at the top and working my way down. So let's start with the positive points. And the first of these are those sun tokens that you gather throughout the game and then allow you to overbuild on top of your previous tiles in the last couple turns of the game. The reason this is great is because it adds strategy to the game. Without these sun tokens at all, this is a purely tactical game. Every turn would just be how many points do I get from each tile placement, maximize the points, looking at the options, and then that's your turn, boom. But having these sun tokens, you need to think about giving yourself good options for late game large overbuilds. You might do a somewhat suboptimal play this turn so that you know in that last turn of the game you're going to get a ton of water, or you'll seal up a couple of the temples by doing an overbuild. So you have a little bit to think of in the future. This is still a very tactical game, but the sun tokens give you some strategy to kind of latch onto, and it's just a really fun thing to think about. You kind of look forward the whole game to those last couple turns because they're very important, they're very powerful, and they're the most interesting things that you're going to do. Positive number 2 has to do with how easy this game is to teach and to understand for people who are not necessarily as familiar with board gaming in general. I think it's a great introduction into tiling as a mechanic for a couple different reasons. The first of which is you have a little bit of area majority with the temple scoring. That's a thing that many tile-laying games have, but it's not the main emphasis of this game. It just touches on it a little bit, so you're thinking about, well, if I do this, do I put myself in a favorable position to be able to stay on top and get those points? You also have the other options that are always in tile-laying games of, do I put my tile here, or here, or here? And you really think about what are the benefits of those 3 things, and weighing what those benefits mean to you. Like maybe this one gets you more points right now, but this other one gets you more sun tiles, which will let you do more in the late game. And it does a very good job of that. On top of that, you don't have to worry about a bunch of illegal plays that are hard to understand. Games like Carcassonne, for instance, you can only put your tiles in certain orientations because the roads have to match and the cities have to match. This game doesn't have that at all. You can rotate your tile as much as you want to, and of course you have to place it next to forest tiles and not other people's worker tiles, but that's really easy to see. You can just glance at the board, it makes a checkerboard pattern, there's no problems figuring out all the legal places you can play, and you spend most of your time thinking about what's the best option for me to go into. So all in all, this is a great gateway game. I think it teaches tiling very well. And now for my one neutral point, and that has to do with score clustering. It seems like every time I finish the game, I am surprised at how tight all of our scores are. It might be the winning player with 52, and then somebody has 51, and then 2 people are tied at 49. The variance in score seems to rarely be more than 5 points, which it's a bit weird, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing, because it makes you feel like all the different mechanics in the game might be so balanced to the point where individual decisions don't have that much of an effect. Like if somebody just goes crazy on the temple scoring and somebody else gets lots of cacao beans and turns them into the market, it still seems like those two people come together with almost the exact same score, and oftentimes a single point is going to swing the game one way or another. And when you have around 50 points in a game, that seems like a very small thing. You know, if your winning score was 8 and you won by 1 point, that would be a much bigger deal than if your winning score was 52. I don't think it detracts from the game at all. It's a bit peculiar, and every time I've finished a game, it's had me wondering what kind of effect subtle random variances have on the endgame score versus just player skill being the thing that wins the game. And now for my one negative. Simply put, to me, this game has ended up being surprisingly boring. I was expecting to love it. I was super excited about it when I first saw it. The pictures online look gorgeous. I read the rules. I got really excited because you have this awesome checkerboard pattern. You have these tiles. You have a hand of tiles, unlike most tile laying games where you just draw one and put it out on the board. They've got little workers on them, so the orientation is important. You can do things when it's not your turn because somebody else plays down and it's adjacent to a tile that you played, so you get stuff when it's not even your turn. Oh, it seemed great, and I bought it, and I got it, and I played it, and I was just very much feeling like, oh, that's it? At the end of the game? Like, okay, this is your points, this is my points, I lost. I don't feel necessarily vested. I couldn't figure out why I was not interested in that first play, so I played it again. And I found the sun token placement, or placing tiles so that you have good sun token placement later in the game. That was kind of interesting, but that game was also not terribly engaging to me. And the third time I played it, it was kind of a similar thing over and over again. And I think ultimately the problem I have is that most turns just feel like simple math problems. If I go here, I get 6 points. If I go here, I get 4 points. If I go here, I get 3 points. I will place in the 6-point spot. My turn is over, I draw a new tile, and I will do it again on the next turn. It seems like an exercise in addition, which is not really what I'm looking for. I want tense, tough decisions. And occasionally you have a spot where you're like, well, this is 5 points and this is 6 points, but this gives me a little bit better of a shot at temple scoring. Well, then that's not much of a decision, right? You'll just do the thing for temple scoring because that's only 1 point difference. It seems like usually the decisions that you have to make are relatively easy to evaluate. And this doesn't mean that I feel like I win every time. In fact, I don't. I've won a couple times, but I just feel like it's almost like you're going through the random tiles. Like they come out and you play the best you can. It's highly tactical. You do all your little addition and then you see if you have more points than everybody else at the end of the game, and it's just never been engaging enough. Now, people may argue, and they may argue correctly, that the sun token strategic placement for the end of the game plays is super important, and that's an interesting decision, but I have not found it to be interesting enough. Ultimately, the only turns I really find myself thinking about, oh, this cool, oh, that's cool, that's cool, are the last 2 to 3 turns of the game when I'm spending those sun tokens, and I don't necessarily want to play a game where only 2 to 3 of the turns are really interesting to me and the other 8 or so are not. So ultimately, it comes together into a much more boring package than I was expecting, and I've definitely been surprised by that. And now let's talk about replayability. If you watch the negative section, you probably have some idea of what I'm about to say. And that is that I think that the replayability of this game is pretty low for me. I felt like after playing it once, I'd seen pretty much everything the game had to offer, and then I played it again, and that confirmed it. And then I played it again, and that really confirmed it. And a couple more times. I played it quite a few times, but I think that's almost because I kept hoping that it would show something new, or hoping that I would finally get it and be like, oh yeah, this is great. But that never happened. And every time I played it, I felt less and less like playing it again. And that is kind of the definition of not being very replayable. I don't think that the random way that the tiles come out each game is enough to make me compelled to play it again to see, oh, well, let's see what happens this time. Maybe the mines will come out late, or maybe the watering holes will all come out early. And sure, that'll modify how the game specifically plays in that one session, but it does not change things enough for me. Now, your mileage may vary. If you really, really like what it shows you in that first game, then cool, you might get a whole bunch of plays out of it. But for someone like me, that is probably not the case. And now let's cover player count. Cacao plays 2 to 4 players, and it seems to be very balanced in how well it plays across those different player counts. It has rules to take tiles out based on the number of players you have. In a 2-player game, you use all of your personal tiles, but you take a bunch of forest tiles out. Versus a 4-player game, you use all the forest tiles, but you get rid of a bunch of personal tiles. So the game seems to last about the same length depending on the number of players you have, and that's a good thing. I think that it's kind of nitpicky to really go into the differences between the different ones because they are so similar. I mean, The two-player game, the temples are less interesting because there is just two of you going after them. If one person gets first place and the other person gets second place, well then that's only a 3-point spread. In a three-player game, then you have somebody who has a 6-point swing versus somebody else in general on those temples, so that's more interesting. And in the 4-player game, I found that in the very, very late game, those last couple turns where you're doing the overbuilds with the sun tokens, there could be a little bit of downtime because there are quite a bit of little mathematical things you have to do in your head, counting this up, that's that many points, counting this up, that's that many points. So it can take a little bit of time to get back to you, but I would not say that that's necessarily analysis paralysis prone. It's just a thing to keep in mind. Either way, 3 is probably best, but 2 to 4 is totally fine. In conclusion, there's no getting around the fact that I've been somewhat disappointed by Cacao. I was expecting a much more engaging and interesting experience than what I got. I found that there are much less interesting decisions that I wanted, usually just a couple in the whole game, and that's not the end of the world when the game usually plays like 30 to 45 minutes. It's quite quick depending on the people that you play with. And it's fun to introduce to people who are not very experienced with board games. Like, it's a very cool intro into tiling. It's very easy to get out. It looks neat and it has some cool ideas. I just felt like it did not come together into a package that was interesting. I keep wanting to like it more than I end up actually liking it, which saddens me. I think I'll probably be keeping it for a while because it is easy to get out on the table and teach to people, but for me personally, I will find myself rarely volunteering it and saying, hey guys, let's play Cacao, it's really cool. I'm not going to be saying that. I'm going to be saying, oh, you've never played a tile-laying game before? Well, let me pull Cacao off the shelf and I will teach you how this whole kind of mechanic and genre works in board gaming in general, and then I might feed them into more interesting tile-laying games after that. So I think that your mileage will definitely vary with this one. I can't recommend it, but that does not mean that it's bad. I think if you and your play group really enjoy simpler tile-laying games, you might really enjoy this game. In fact, many people are very jazzed about it online. I've just been not one of those people. I keep wanting to find the magic, see what's really going on in this game that makes people so excited, and it keeps just not happening to me. And ultimately, I think as time goes on, it's just going to see less and less table time because there's just more interesting things for me to try. If you'd like to see more in-depth reviews like this one, as well as full game playthroughs and vlogs, please subscribe to my channel. Also, if you'd like to become more involved with the channel, you can directly support it at patreon.com/JonGetsGames. Thanks for watching.